Hey, everybody. Welcome to Daniel Davis Deep Dive live from Washington, D.C. Man, do we got a good one for you today. We have retired Colonel Douglas Macgregor, war hero, CEO of Our Country, Our Choice, and fan favorite here at Deep Dive. So welcome back to the show, Doug.
Yeah, happy to be here.
Well, we've got a lot of stuff to talk about here today. A lot going on both in Israel and Hamas war, but we're going to be focusing today on the Russia-Ukraine war, and lots of stuff going on right here in Washington, D.C., actually. So we're kind of on the new front lines of it today because I guess literally just before you came on, Zelensky and President Biden made a very brief show up in the Oval or in the White House. Yeah, in the Oval Office there. We'll be getting to some of that in a minute. But first of all, I want to kind of set the stage for where we're going to be going here and getting some of your views, Doug, on what the reality of the situation is. We're going to talk a little bit and show you a little bit about what people are saying, but we're going to actually go deeper, and you're going to tell us, basically translate into reality what these people are, what's going on behind the scenes here. First of all, this from earlier today about why Zelensky's here at all.
There is not a lot of time left here. They say the U.S. funds for Ukraine's defense will run out at the end of the year. And the White House is warning there is a real risk that they could lose this war. And that, they say, could have dire consequences for U.S. national security and our international interests. But right now, there is no clear way out of this. It is not clear what is going to satisfy Republicans' demands or just how far President Biden is willing to go to compromise. And there is not a lot of time left here. Congress is set to head out of town at the end of the week.
Well, I just on the surface of it, and we'll be touching on this quite a bit momentarily, but that there's a chance that Ukraine might lose this war is a pretty interesting way to talk about it. But as she's talking about there, the real issue right here is, in this particular case, even more than President Biden, is what is Congress going to say? And here's, first of all, let's look at the U.S. Senate. Here's what the view is from the Democrats on the Senate side.
President Zelensky made it so clear how he needs help. But if he gets the help, he can win this war. And even many of our Republican colleagues talked about we are winning this war. If he gets the help he needs, he will win.
Man, okay, we might have to interrupt there for a second, Doug. That what I saw there reminds me of a really stark video in 2013 when General Allen, who was then the commander of the U.S. forces in Afghanistan, said, "This is winning. This is what winning looks like." And now here, after 2 years nearly of war and a complete utter fail summer offensive, he says we're winning. I'm not sure what definition he's using.
Well, would you buy a used car from Chuck Schumer?
I would not.
No, not a chance. And I imagine that Mr. Zelensky brought his copies of the Epstein tapes with him to visit Washington so that he could show President Biden that both he and Hunter are on those tapes, along with most of the Congress. And if you don't give me the money I want, then I'm going to release the tapes. I suspect that was the real core of the conversation. Look, this is a tragedy. And someone said something about eventually tragedy becomes farce. Everything has become a farce. The lying has been so indiscriminate and so constant and overwhelming that it's no longer possible to lie. But what do you do when everything that you've promised has failed? When your policies are disastrous, when everything that you said had happened has not? Well, you double down and you continue to lie and lie. After all, you do have the media with you. The media is not going to hold a program for an hour and say, these are the 62 principal lies that you were told over the last several years, and you need to know the truth. I don't remember a television program like that coming on about Vietnam for at least 20, 25 years.
Right.
So I think
you see, even in that clip that I showed there from ABC News at the start of this, they're just reporting what people were said. They're not saying, how is this even possible that you're talking about might be losing? They just say what they're being said. And no one questioned Schumer after he made that comment here. But over on the House side, we have a little bit different view.
What the Biden administration seems to be asking for is billions of additional dollars with no appropriate oversight, no clear strategy to win, and none of the answers that I think the American people are owed. I have also made very clear from day one that our first condition on any national security supplemental spending package is about our own national security first. The border is an absolute catastrophe.
Now, before we comment on Johnson's views there, because he's definitely not an open checkbook kind of a guy, clearly, there's an interesting view from overseas on how Congress is viewing this, specifically the Republicans. And we had this earlier on Sky News today from the UK.
The Ukrainians are running short of ammunition, particularly artillery shells. And this money is really critical. And it's 61 billion, which is in the package. There's 14 billion for Israel, 61 billion for Ukraine, about 31 billion for other things, including Taiwan. It's 106 billion. And it's held. It's locked. And some Republicans oppose it because they're playing hardball against more money for a wall in the South, against immigration in the South. But some Republicans oppose it simply because they oppose it. They oppose the idea of money for Ukraine. They're saying, look, we spent 200 billion in Ukraine. What will another 60 billion achieve? The 200 billion hasn't so far achieved. And of course, there's an answer to that, but they pose that question.
I just find it interesting that he finds it, number one, odd that we care about the security of our southern border. But then number two, that some Republicans just disagree with it, for no reason. Well, I mean, other than 200 billion in 2 years of war have produced no progress on the battlefield, especially in the last 12 months. And that people are asking that. And he's saying, well, just don't worry about that. There's an answer for it. Well, yeah, there's an answer for it. It didn't work. Everything you did and everything you put into it, 200 billion has done nothing. Why should we give, Doug, another 60 billion?
Well, first of all, to go back to Mike Johnson, he's very much an open checkbook guy, specifically when it comes to the state of Israel. If he were serious about our national security, then he would demand the commitment immediately of 60,000 U.S. Army troops to the border with Mexico, immediately, in Texas, Arizona, New Mexico, California, that these troops would have the mission of securing it, stopping the human trafficking, stopping the drugs. They would be supplemented by the United States Coast Guard, which is stupidly patrolling the South China Sea, where there's nothing for them to do. Then I would take him seriously. That doesn't mean I don't want to support the state of Israel. Absolutely not. But are we serious about our own country? Or is Israel that important that it must precede all other considerations that come across his desk? Well, obviously, he signed on for Israel, period. Congratulations, Mike. Perhaps they'll award you citizenship. But damn it, if you're serious about the United States, you take care of this country first. We haven't done that. I would be happy to see the 61 billion headed for Ukraine to go into immediate commitment of U.S. forces and security on the borders, all the borders, but particularly the southern border, as well as bringing the Coast Guard back from overseas to patrol our waters. That's number one. At that point, I'm happy to discuss all other requests, including the Israeli ones, because obviously Israel is not Ukraine. It's a different animal entirely, and we have different kinds of interests in Israel from those in Ukraine. But I don't see it happening, Dan. It's really endlessly frustrating to me. And this is because we've gotten away with printing money irrationally and recklessly. We've destroyed our financial system. It's going to implode. All you have to do is pick up Alastair MacLeod, James Ricards, go into any of these people, hold all these people are telling you it's not a question of whether or not our financial system will crack and break, it's when. And by the same token, the financial system and the government spending that it subsists on, and it really does, is what keeps the economy going. What do we build? What do we create? What do we manufacture? Answer the question, please. What do we export? What do we?
As a matter of fact, Doug, on that point, we actually have something else to show. Part of Zelensky's visit here was, of course, to have the high profile with the president and then also with the Senate and the House. But there was another visit today which got a little bit more interest, and that is with some of the titans of the defense industry. There's I'm going to read you some of the names of some of the people at whose hands he's shaking right now. Those the president of BAE Systems, Boeing president, CEO of Sierra Nevada Corp, Northrop Grumman, RTX, Lockheed Martin, General Dynamics, and several others. I mean, all he's doing right there in that whole, happy picture there, that's not about defending Ukraine. That's about expanding the bottom lines of our defense industry and having all these contracts going on here. So I think they're showing their hand about what this is really about here in the United States.
Well, I know some of these people, Dan, and I understand them. They're about money. They're about lining their pockets. They're about what we call shareholder value. They don't really care about most of the employees under them. They don't care whether or not they're producing anything that's really what we need. In fact, I've sat with many executives over the years and they said, well, look, we agree with you. We recommend, we agree with your recommendations and we'd be happy to do that. But you have to understand that's not what we're asked to do. When Congress and the generals and the admirals meet with us, they just want more of what they've already got. And, we're in business. So thanks very much. It's been an interesting afternoon. Good luck. God bless. We're going to keep producing things we don't need. That is, that the American people and the national defense doesn't need. I don't know how you fix that because money drives everything. And that's all they care about. And that's not surprising. And I'm not faulting them for taking the position that they are responsible for large corporations and, of course, shareholder value. I hate that shareholder value term because up until World War II, we used to talk about providing the best possible product at the most reasonable price. That's all gone now.
Yeah.
We provide whatever we want to provide to make as much money as possible for our shareholders. And frankly, most of those guys are not engineers. They didn't come up through any assembly lines. They're not innovators. Most of those people are financial gurus and lawyers, for God's sakes. What do you expect them to do? I mean, people that are, you and I have talked about what was wrong with the M1 tank series back in 1991, none of which has been fixed. Well, why is that? They don't care about it. They're going to ship you whatever the M1 is. Okay, General, that's what you want. You got it. If that's what you want, Congressman, you got it. Is that what you want, Senator? You got it. Again, that's if you want to play in that arena, that's what you do. You don't,
Doug. I remember a conversation you and I had. I want to say 2007 or 8, somewhere around there, when I was in the Future Combat Systems program at Fort Bliss at the time, before it was canned and shut down. And we had this conversation because you had already had Breaking the Phalanx, and I think you'd already had another book out at that time on military modernization, Transformation Under Fire, I believe is what we were talking about at that time, to where you'd laid out, like, look, here's the problems of the FCS. Here's the problem with all the technology they're trying to pursue. And you talked to industry. I remember you told me that. You talked to some of the industry people and said, here's what we need. Here's what will actually work. And they said, yeah, we can do that. But only orders we're getting are for more M1s and upgraded M1s and these things that are never going to come into pass. And we'll spend lots of money on making those things as long as they keep it going. But it's not what is going to make anything work. And you pointed that out in at least 2008. And now here we are in 2023. Nothing's changed.
Well, I remember a corporate officer from the firm that ultimately became primarily responsible for FCS. And he had just attended a meeting and he had met with the Army Chief of Staff at the time, who was General Shinseki. And he was brought over to see me by someone who had served with me that said, after he'd come out of the meeting, he was frustrated. And they said, let me go introduce you to this colonel. I served under him and you'll really appreciate what he has to say. So he came in. We sat and talked for about 45 minutes. But he opened the discussion by saying that the things that the Army wanted at that point were simply not realistic, couldn't be attained. You'd have to break the laws of physics and fractal mathematics and everything else if you were going to get the things the Chief of Staff wanted. And whenever you said that, the Chief of Staff made it clear, well, if you're not going to do what I want you to do, I'll spend the money with someone else. And so he said, we finally decided if we don't take the contract, we're going to lose all this money because it'll just go to some other Big 5 defense firm, and then they'll get the billions of dollars that we would have otherwise gotten. So I said, yeah, no, I understand that. That's unfortunate, but you absolutely positively know that it won't work. Sure, we know that. And, I'd have difficulty doing that because I was a soldier like you, and I would be very concerned about whatever we provided to people. But, there's good news at the end of this tunnel, and you know what it is. FCS never provided anything. So you and I can rest assured that all the people that were there made general, and they went on to great glory, and program managers made lots of money, but nothing came of it. And that was all right because Congress was preeminently concerned about the money being spent.
And I almost hate to bring this up, but speaking of generals, and them, trying to grease the trough there. We had another general again today making some very interesting comments about the Ukraine situation. And well, I'll just let him speak for himself.
Ukraine has not failed. I think we in the West have failed. We failed to commit strategically to Ukraine winning, and therefore we have failed to deliver those capabilities that Ukraine needs and has expected. But also just the psychological aspect. We have not said we want Ukraine to win.
Wow, it's hard to even reply to that. We haven't said we want Ukraine to win, and them not winning is our fault. Like, we didn't give them enough stuff, and I don't know, maybe we didn't fight for them. But man, Ben Hodges is a really strange cat when it comes to just like almost ignoring patent reality on the battlefield.
Well, I don't think he's particularly strange. I think he's pretty standard for what we get right now in the senior ranks of the armed forces. First of all, I'd find out who he's working for in retirement and identify the cash source that sustains him and pays for stupid remarks on television. That's what everybody needs to do. I wish that every time some former or retired general officer came on board to share his brilliance with the American public, that someone somewhere underneath his name, someone would write, oh, this man works for, who is it, Lockheed Martin, or this think tank, which is ultimately a front for this corporation and these people, or a foreign lobby, and on and on and on. And we've got a lot of foreign lobbies that pretend to be domestic lobbies. So it's an enormous problem. That would be helpful. But there's something else with Hodges, and I really think he jumped out of too many airplanes in the airborne without a helmet, because the remarks that he makes are phenomenally stupid. And I don't know what his experience is on the ground fighting anybody, but I don't think he knows much about it. I don't think he's studied his profession or warfare. Those are the best things that I can say.
Yeah, and I mean, again, it's just so divorced from what's physically on the ground in reality. And let's talk about that for a second, because most of the conversation here in the United States, and as you saw from Schumer before, is about we need to give Ukraine this money so that they'll lose. The implication being that money is what they're missing here. If they just had more cash, then all these things that we saw on the battlefield are going to be reversed. But as this British fellow said a second ago, he goes, people are asking the question, if 200 billion didn't do anything, why is another 61 billion going to make any difference? And what do you see, Doug, on the battlefield, say over the next 6 months?
Well, I don't think it'll go on for another 6 months, frankly. I mean, we may never install a new government that will do our bidding. If that is the case, then perhaps something else will emerge. I hear people say, oh, well, Zelensky, he's admittedly terrible, criminal, crooked, corrupt, so forth. But Zelensky, General Zelensky, he's a really great person and he really cares. Yeah, right. If he'd have given a damn, he'd have stopped this a long time ago. One of my favorite anecdotes from the Second World War, and this is a German officer who lived through it and fought through it. And he said to me, now, Stalingrad falls on the 2nd of February, 1943. And Hitler's birthday is the 20th of April. And by the 20th of April, all of the senior generals of the German armed forces signed a pledge of allegiance, effectively, to Adolf Hitler, congratulating him on his birthday and pledging their allegiance to him come what may. He said there was not a single solitary German general with the patriotism and the compassion, if for nothing else, for the German soldiers and German people, to stand up and say, someone needs to remove this man, or better yet, I've got a pistol, I'll go do it. Incomprehensible. Now, eventually they get around to it, but it was too late. It was too weak. Imagine that. How many lives could have been saved by removing that man in 1943? It didn't happen. It was, they stayed in the same rut. That's what we're dealing with now. We're dealing with it in Ukraine. We're dealing with it everywhere. What do you think is going to help the Israeli Defense Force to, quote unquote, win in Gaza? Well, let's send them 45,000 more tank shells. Let's send them 200 more 2,000-pound bombs with precision strike kits. And it's not going to work. Oh, yeah, you can flatten Gaza. You can expel the population. You can kill large numbers of them. Are you really winning anything? Is that going to buy Israel security? Well, then we move on to the West Bank, or we move up to Hezbollah.
Right.
Good luck. You know, this is not going to work. And covering up the truth, and I think you and many others have pointed to it, I don't have the sources from Israel that I did for Eastern Europe, so I don't have confidence in the numbers. All I can do is read what a journalist in Israel says or what comes out in Haaretz and so forth. But if they're close to being right, and the Israelis have lost 3,700 plus dead already in uniform in Gaza, how many more are they likely to lose against Hezbollah, or what are they going to lose in the West Bank? All the while, the rest of the region is mobilizing quietly, but they're mobilizing, and none of the governments want to fight. Everybody knows that, but the populations do. They are enraged, and we may see some of these Arab regimes in particular go away for the very reason they've done nothing to this point. So I just see no good news in any of this, but I see no one in charge, because the people in charge are sitting primarily today in Jerusalem. They're running the show, and they're telling us what they want, and they're telling us what we will do and what we will provide. Fine. What's going on in Kiev right now? Not much. It's hopeless. Everybody knows that. People are still dying. 40, 50, 60, 70-year-old men are going out there and being killed. Young women are being killed. 13, 14, 15-year-old boys are being killed. The Ukrainian secret police is running around giving a good demonstration of what the NKVD was like for Stalin. Stalin murdered 1 million Soviet soldiers who refused to fight against the Germans. Well, I wouldn't be surprised if we're not going to see many, many more thousands refuse to fight in this war against the Russians, and for good reasons. The problem is no one will stand up and be counted. We're back to the failure in April 1943 to finally say, no, this must end here and now. So where do we go from here? I think it gets worse. I think things escalate. Now, just before I came on, I saw something in Zero Hedge about a supposed proposal from Mr. Netanyahu to make some sort of agreement with Hezbollah that would put U.S. and French troops on the border between Israel and Hezbollah. Once again, I'm sure Mike Johnson thinks this is a great idea. In the meantime, there are no troops on our border, but he's probably quite willing to put U.S. troops on the Israeli border, which I think would be a catastrophe.
Oh, yeah, it'd be disaster.
But beyond that, it sort of sounds like some version of the Nazi-Soviet pact. Let's buy some time here with a temporary ceasefire, and then we can go back to it later. It's not going to lead to anything, and I would privately be very surprised if Hezbollah and any of its supporters in Tehran think this is a good idea. Why would you place your trust and confidence in any of this? And if you look at our behavior in Ukraine and the things that we have said about the Russians, they're almost as bad as what Netanyahu and the president of Israel, Herzog, have said about the Arabs. They're animals, subhuman. We've almost said things that bad about the Russians.
Yeah.
Why would anybody trust anything we cooked up, let alone the Israelis?
Yeah, and then therein is your problem, and there's just continues to be the lack of any willingness to look at just the fundamental realities on the ground, and I mean that even goes so far as to right now, with even within the Democrats of talking about this money, other than these bumper stickers of they will win if we give them the money. No one knows what that means, so they're not even articulating. Even if you say the money should go onto the border or anything else, or just not get borrowed, they're not even putting out a basic answer of what is the money going to be used for? How is this going to change the outcome of the previous 22 months? And how is that in America's national interest? And what's the end game? How does this lead to some kind of a negotiated settlement that gets us back to a period of no war? We don't even seem to be interested in no war. We only seem to be interested in this fiction that says, no, we desire for Russia to lose. I've heard that a ton of times, but no plan or path or even idea how to get there.
Well, we're an 18-wheeler. We have an enfeebled human being sitting behind the wheel who's taking instructions from people sitting next to him and behind him. And the 18-wheeler is fully loaded and has no brakes. And we can see as we're headed down the side of this particular mountain that at the bottom of the mountain, there's nothing but concrete barriers. I think that's where we're headed collectively as a society. I think that's where we're headed as a nation. And that's where we have dragged our allies in NATO with us. And I'm afraid that by failing to exercise any kind of restraint and control over this event, the event since 7 October, that we're dragging Israel down with us. And again, everyone that saw 7 October, and I included this, the Arabs, heads of state, they were all appalled. There's no question about that. It's not up for debate. It's terrible. Yeah. And lots of people could look at that and say, well, these people deserve an object lesson. All right. What's the object lesson? 5,000, 10,000 dead, how many houses, whatever. But it's just beyond that now. This has now become a war from the standpoint of the Arabs, Iranians and Turks. They see this as a war for Jewish supremacy in the region. It's not like the wars in the past. Remember, in the wars in the past, some territory was picked up. Sometimes it was exchanged. Prisoners were exchanged. And then there was a period of time where you had periodic outbursts, but not entirely peace, but certainly not war. And then we've had this 50-year pause in Egypt because of the agreements that were reached there, which I think were enormously important and valuable. And now they're very much at risk. I don't see any of that, as you say. I see no diplomacy. What I see are people determined to eradicate those that they hate. And hate breeds more hatred. Blood begets more blood.
Right.
It's not going to solve anything. It's going to end badly. I think it's going to end badly for all of us. On that happy note, I wish everyone a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. That's unfortunately, that's just the reality of it. And as we continue to, I guess, look on to what's next, it just troubles me that whether Mike Johnson ends up giving in or some combination of that, I can't imagine that Rand Paul, who we had on this show last week, talk about how, he said, I don't think there should be any more money, but I bet there'll be some more money coming in. But then no one tells me what's next, or no one's given that consideration because, Doug, tell me, I mean, if there is some, let's say, for example, you were given command control of all the armed forces in the area. Is there some plan? Is there some path that if they only follow the Ukraine side, that they could either achieve a stalemate or even in time roll back Russia? Does such a plan exist?
No. What I would say if I were in command of the armed forces right now is it is imperative, whether we like it or not, that we sit down privately and listen to what the Russians demand. It's that simple. There's no longer an opportunity to negotiate whatever the people in Kyiv think is equitable. Too many people have died. Too much time has been lost. Too much bad blood has been spilled. So the first thing you've got to do is you've got to stop fighting. You need an immediate ceasefire in place. And then you have to have a meeting on the battlefield, preferably somewhere in eastern Ukraine where the fighting is being gone on. They bring their maps, everybody shows up, and they make some sort of agreement about disengagement. Meanwhile, once that disengagement is underway, they've got to sit down somewhere else on a political level with the leading diplomats, advised by their military experts, as to how they're going to redraw the map. And everyone acts like, oh, you can't redraw the map. Do you realize how many hundreds of times the maps of Eastern Europe and the Middle East have been redrawn? How many empires have risen and fallen over hundreds of years? It's nonsensical. You got to stop the fighting. It's sort of what's the first thing you do in an emergency situation when you find someone that's injured? Well, I tell you, number one, first step, stop the bleeding. Yeah. Clear the airway. I mean, you just go down the list. All right. First thing we need to do is stop the bleeding. If you can stop the bleeding long enough and go through the steps that I just suggested, disengagement, I think something similar, frankly, needs to happen with the Israelis. But I think we're far further from that right now than we are in Ukraine. But right now, that's what's in Ukraine's interest, and not Mr. Zelensky and the crooks and criminals who have been stealing everything they get their hands on, who all have bank accounts in Cyprus and homes in Italy somewhere. I'm talking about the Ukrainian people and the nation. Yeah. They're the ones that have to be saved from this wreckage. That can be done. But I don't think we can do it, Dan. I mean, are we going to be trusted? Is anybody going to listen to us? And so all we want to do is say for as long as it takes and whatever they want. And so there's not even any concept of that. That's been one of the most disheartening things to me
for the better part of this year is that there's not any effort, not any intention at all to bring the war to an end, only to just give whatever Kiev asked for. And here's the perverse part. What you just laid out there is the one plan I have seen that could actually succeed, could end the war, could end the destruction of Ukraine, what's left of it, end the killing, and actually has a shot. Even that's not guaranteed because of the distrust that's been built up over the last 20 years in Russia and elsewhere, but it's got a solid shot. What we're doing now has the greatest possibility of losing yet more territory for Ukraine, more people to die pointlessly, and then we won't have a choice at some point, Doug. I think at some point we're just given terms and that's it. That's the end of the war. I think that's where we're heading if we don't do what you said now.
I think strategically we are set up for a Dunkirk. It's coming. Instead of leaving Europe, amidst fond farewells and waves, I think we're going to end up in a position where people are telling us to get out. Get out as quickly as possible. And by the way, don't come back. We've not simply overstayed our welcome. We've now destroyed European economies. And our influence has profoundly affected the European society. We're the ones that said, if you don't let these millions of non-Europeans into your societies, regardless of their backgrounds, regardless of who they are and what they did, then you're a racist. And if you're racist, we don't approve of you. You're not sufficiently democratic. This is all the nonsense that we talk about and preach. Of course, we don't really practice it. But in the meantime, and I try to finish all of my interviews with this, I say to people, remember, the borders are open. And until those borders are closed, our nation is at severe risk of all sorts of terrible things, not the least of which is going under because of this enormous number of people. We are like a lifeboat. I'm sure you must have seen the films, and I'm sure a lot of your viewers have read the psychological studies that talk about the lifeboat problem. The lifeboat is designed to carry 12 people or something, and you end up with 25 or 30 people that want to be saved. And over time, you have to make hard decisions. But you can't bring in all of those people or you sink the lifeboat.
Yeah.
Our boat is sinking. That's the problem.
Yep. And, man, if we don't do something quick, we're going to swamp ourselves. And I just hope we can avoid that. But thank you so much for coming on today, Doug, because even though these are really hard problems, we really value, your viewpoints coming on here where you actually have, here is a positive outcome that you don't like. We won't like the outcome of here, but it's achievable and it's much better than the alternative. And we're going to keep giving people those kinds of views here. And we're going to keep having you back on as much as you'll come on to, because you are, like this show, unintimidated and uncompromised on the truth. And we wish you, happy holidays as well, even though there's challenging times here. But thanks for coming on, and we'll see you next time on Daniel Davis Deep Dive.
Same to you, Dave.